For roughly 33 years, from 1940 to 1973, the U.S. engaged in active conscription. Young men could be called to compulsory military service in an era that spanned from the Second World War through the war in Vietnam. Over that period, some 23.5 million men were drafted into the U.S. military. Following an amendment to the Military Selective Service Act signed November 26, 1969, draftees were chosen by lottery. The draft lottery was based on a random drawing. Specific birthdays were paired randomly to a number between 1 and 366. Draftees were chosen from lowest to highest numbers, and how high the draft numbers would go in a given year depended upon the military needs at the time, expressed through quotas set for local draft boards. While any male between the age of 18 and 25 was subject to the selective service system, the draft would choose men aged 20 first and men aged 18 last. But by the end of 1972, the U.S. role in the war in Vietnam had almost ended, and the draft had become increasingly unpopular. Facing political pressure and having made ending the draft a campaign issue in 1968, President Nixon announced that conscription would end on January 27, 1973. While draft lotteries would continue until 1975, there were no calls to service after those drafted in December 1972. If your number came up in 1972, you were among the last people to be drafted. Just short of 50,000 men were inducted via the Selective Service Draft in 1972, a number much lower than previous years. Following an executive order in January 1973, draft authority expired after June 30th that year. Once a draft notice was received, there would be a period, by law at least 10 days, though usually longer, between when the draft notice was received and when the draftee would be required to report for induction. During this period, exams, physical, mental, and moral, would be conducted, and draftees would have an opportunity to appeal for a deferment or exclusion as a conscientious objector. It could, depending upon the process and appeals, be several months between receiving the notice and the induction date. Thus, a strange oddity. On December 26, 1972, former President Harry Truman passed away, and President Nixon declared a national day of mourning on the 28th. As a result, on December 28, 1972, the last day in 1972 in which men were scheduled to be sworn into service, federal offices were closed, and some 300 men scheduled for induction that day could not be sworn in. Those draftees were shifted to an extended priority group, and that group was not called up again, and thus those 300 received an unexpected reprieve. Draft authority expired before they were inducted. While those 300 never had to serve, some 644 others who had been drafted in 1972 and whose induction dates had been delayed for various reasons were inducted before conscription ended at the end of June.